Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Today's video topic is rather vague, but basically it just means anything that happened while in a car, or someone who was creepy that was in a car, like hitchhiking, sleeping in your car, those types of things. Anyway, I've been dealing with a really sore throat for the last week, so if I sound a little off, that's why. But I hope you enjoy regardless, and sit back and relax. Several months ago, I had a bit too much to drink with some friends. I arrived back to my car around 12 a.m. and I decided I wasn't in any condition to drive. I grabbed whatever blankets and jackets I had, curled up in the back seat and fell asleep. Around 4 a.m. I woke up hungover, but much more sober than before. I reached to the front and started my car to warm up. As I sat back down, I looked out the rearview window and saw a man. He was wearing a dark hoodie with a red backpack on. He was standing under a streetlight, staring at me from the middle of the parking lot. I was confused. It was dark and I thought I was just seeing things, but then he started walking towards my car. I have never jumped into the driver's seat with such swiftness in my life. I swear my heart felt like it stopped. He proceeded to stop and just stood there, watching me drive away. It still makes me feel uneasy to this day. I like to believe that he was not watching me sleep, but needless to say, I will not be sleeping in my car ever again. Before I began, this encounter happened about 10 years ago. I was 22 years old, and I am well aware that this was a very poor judgment call on my part. My parents always taught me to help someone in need, just not necessarily to the extent that I allowed. Up until this point, I didn't really have much reason not to trust people, and that they may not always have good intentions. I have also had an unreasonably difficult time saying no to people my whole life, and have since had the help of a therapist to be better about that. I've only told this story to a handful of people because I'm truly ashamed of my actions and potentially putting my daughter's life in danger. I was on my way to an event of some kind with my 3-year-old daughter when I realized I had left something behind in my apartment. I was close enough to home that I decided to turn around and head home. As I was pulling into the parking lot of my apartment complex, a woman was walking kind of in the middle of the driving area and began waving me down. I pulled up next to the woman and rolled down my window about 1/3 of the way. She gave me this story about how she works nearby at a nursing home and how she had ran out of gas on her way to the gas station and was asking for directions to the gas station. I didn't think much of the fact that she was roaming around an apartment complex because it was pretty common for people to cut through, as it sat between two main roads and avoids traffic lights. I gave her directions for a 5-minute walk to the gas station, but then she mentioned that she was pregnant and that she wasn't feeling well. I tried telling her I was in a hurry and assured her that it would be a quick walk, but she begged. At this time, she noticed that my daughter was in the back seat. She had a look of surprise that I didn't think much of at the time, and she began talking to my daughter and made her laugh. She turned back to me and asked one last time if I could drive her to the gas station. At this point, I just gave in. I let her in my car, and she almost immediately asked if I have any money that she can use. My heart sank at this point, realizing that she was probably just lying and just wanted to lie her way into some cash. I was honest with her and told her that I was broke and that I also didn't carry cash on me. She pointed out another resident in the complex and asked me to drive her to them. In my mind, there was still a slight possibility that she needed gas, but she didn't have the funds for it. So I drive her to the other person and she rolled down my window asking for money. They said no, and she pointed out another person. At this time, I told her that I really had to be somewhere and I couldn't keep helping her. I drove her closer to the other person, but far enough that she would have to get out to talk to them, which thankfully she did. Once she got out of my car, I sped off and drove to my destination. Told my mother about the story, and a week later she sent me a clip from the local news. The news mentioned a woman who would approach people asking for a simple favor, which led her to asking them for money. If these people said no, she pulled out a syringe or needle of some kind and would threaten to stab them with it, and even did end up stabbing them on one occasion. I look at the image of the person and instantly recognize this woman that was in my car. I know these type of people don't have much of a conscience, but I truly believe the fact that my daughter was in the car with me that day is what kept the woman from stabbing me. I believe this was April 2018. I had gone to Colorado for a concert and was just driving around checking everything out before and after. The day before the concert, I'm driving through the Rockies because I thought it'd be cool, I guess. It was probably already around 9 p.m. at this point. I get to a gas station and there's an old lady with a giant suitcase. I went inside, bought a pack of Swishers, got gas, and as I was leaving, she asked me for a ride. Being young and stupid, I said sure, hop in ma'am. Then she had me get her giant suitcase in my back seat, and we were off. The ride seemed pretty normal at first, just talked about life. She did most of the talking, mostly about her kids and family. She claimed that she was hitchhiking to Alaska for some insane reason, I can't remember. Anyways, I had a joint that I just decided to give her and let her smoke while we were driving. Not really sure why. Maybe to get her to shut up a little bit. Eventually, she asked if I want to try her weed, but keeps mentioning how it tastes funny, which was a red flag, so I politely said no. Then she started getting weird, talking about homeless camps where people smoked meth. Then I actually got a good look at her and realized she was probably like a 40-year-old tweaker and not as old as I originally thought she was. Also, I think I saw an Adam's apple. She starts pointing out rest stop signs or whatever, which are like 100 miles out, and was trying to convince me to go to one with her. She kept saying, I don't have any money, but some people will have to suck your dick if you give them a ride. At this point, I'm actually driving like a maniac in the middle of a pretty bad snowstorm at the time, in hopes that I'm more visible and noticeable if anything were to happen. I was terrified for my life. I politely refused all her sexual and drug-related advances. Finally, we get to a town on the opposite side of the Rockies from Denver, and I pull up to a gas station and say, okay, I gotta go back to Denver and get some sleep. I'm dropping you off here. All she said was, you're a smart young man, and I helped her unload her suitcase and left, thanking God I was still breathing. If any of my actions are questioned, this was a time in my life when I was particularly lost and not in a good mental state at all. I definitely shouldn't have been roaming Colorado by myself. Smaller guy, no weapon aside from a knife. I'm incredibly lucky. So yesterday I spent a day out with a couple of friends of mine, going an hour away to the next city to meet up and hang out there. Because it's fall now, of course it gets pretty dark early, and it's inevitable to drive home in the dark. Well, I don't know the area very well in the city, and had to use Google Maps for directions, which seemed to take us through the back roads where, in of itself, is very creepy. We had just left from watching a horror movie too, which didn't help our nerves, having noticed that some asshole with LED bright lights kept following us at every single turn. Of course, my friends and I were trying not to panic, but the guy followed us for quite a few miles and possibly flashing his lights at us to tell us something. I wanted to test it and go down a road that wasn't the direction given by Google Maps, but I was worried that it would end up in a dead end and my suspicions would be right that they were following us. I couldn't see the car at all aside from the headlights, so I have no idea what it was or who it was. Thankfully, once we got closer to the highway, he seemed to finally trail off and turn somewhere else. You can bet your ass I had a panic attack right afterwards, including hyperventilating due to the built-up tension. Moral of the story, trust your gut and don't go down any back roads at night. I would like to share my own story that I found incredibly strange and frightening at the time. I'm a female, I was probably 14 at the time. I was walking to school and wanted to get some snacks before I went, and I got to my parents' permission to spend a little bit of cash. As I was walking down, this lady in a blue car honked her horn at me, which made me jump slightly, so I looked her way and asked her if she was alright. She kinda just looked at me, and as I continued walking, she pulled forward. I ducked into a shop because I was pretty weirded out by this at this point, kinda panicky. As I left the shop, lo and behold, the lady was no longer in her car, so I bolted down the roads and hid behind a bush by my village. There aren't a whole lot of places to hide in my town, and I was already running late. A couple minutes later, I was still waiting in the bushes, and I see her drive down, looking around while going weirdly slow. She might have just been grocery shopping or something, but it was enough to shake me, and I never saw her or her car ever again after that day. When my daughter was 2, I was having a tough time as a single mother and decided to take a road trip up Highway 1. I made reservations in Trinidad at a cool cabin in the woods within walking distance of the beach. Before I left, my stepfather gave me his loaded .38 revolver, which I stored under the driver's side seat. Sometime after driving through San Francisco, it was very late and dark, and nobody was on the highway. My daughter was sleeping peacefully in her car seat next to me. Back then, you could legally have the car seats in the front. I noticed a car coming up behind me and passed, but then it slowed down, driving alongside me. I sped up and slowed down, but couldn't shake him. I looked over and this guy had his interior light on and was furiously gesturing me to pull over. I knew I had to find a safe place. There was nobody else on the road, and I was running low on gas. There was just nothing on this highway for miles. I kept driving, but this guy would not leave me alone. I was getting really frightened, but the mama bear was coming out, and I was getting very angry as well. I knew he could see my kid who was still sleeping. Finally, there was an exit up ahead, and a gas station in the middle of nowhere. So I took the exit, and the guy closely followed me. I wasn't sure what to do. The gas station was brightly lit, but had no customers. I didn't feel safe to pull in. I slowly drove past it, driving further into the dark, desolated landscape, and pulled into a large dirt area and drove quite a ways off the highway with him following. Absolutely nothing around. I knew I was in big trouble and needed to take control and wanted to put him in a vulnerable situation. Mama Bear was in full protective mode and I was pissed. I stopped the car, grabbed the gun and jumped out, locking the car behind me. As he pulled up, I ran around to the passenger side and waited. He got out of his car and quickly moved towards me, and I suddenly held the gun up, visible by the moonlight. He came to a halt, surprised, and then I leveled the gun across the car, taking aim. I waited. He stood there, weighing his options, and then turned around, got back in his car and left. Not a word spoken. Totally freaked me out. It was a typical Friday evening, and I was on my way home from work. I was driving my new car, a shiny black sedan that I had just purchased a few weeks earlier. I was feeling pretty good, listening to my favorite music and looking forward to the weekend. As I drove through the city, I noticed a car following me. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as we reached the stoplight, the car pulled up next to me, and I saw that there was 2 men inside. They looked rather rough and menacing, and they had their faces covered with bandanas. The light turned green and I moved forward, but the other car stayed right next to me. I tried to shake them off, but they wouldn't budge. I started to feel a sense of unease and started looking for an escape route. Then, just as we were approaching the intersection, the other car swerved in front of me, forcing me to stop. One of the men got out and walked up to my window. He had a gun in his hand and demanded I get out of the car. I just froze. My mind was racing as I was trying to figure out what to do. I knew I couldn't outrun a bullet, but I didn't want to just give up my car without a fight. I hesitated, and the man with the gun grew more aggressive. He shouted at me to get out of the car, and he cocked the gun, making it clear that he meant business. I knew there was no other option, so I complied with his demands and stepped out of the car with my hands up. The man took my keys and jumped in the car and drove off, leaving me standing on the side of the road in shock. Couldn't believe what just happened. I just lost my brand new car, and all of my personal belongings were inside. I walked to the nearest restaurant and used their phone to call the police. I had to file a report, and I gave them all the details I could remember. Luckily, the police took the matter seriously and tried to track my car via the GPS. Later, it was recovered with my CD player and belongings all gone, and they were never caught. The incident left me shaken, but I was relieved that I had not got hurt. Still, the whole experience had been a terrifying reminder of the dangers that lurk on our streets. After that carjacking incident, I took some self-defense classes and learned to be more aware of my surroundings. It's important to always be alert and aware, and also have a plan of what to do in case of an emergency. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember to stay calm, comply, and call the police immediately after. It was a dark and stormy night. I know, cliché, and I was in the rural countryside. It was extremely windy, and the only light for miles came from a faint glow of the moon peeking out behind the clouds. I was driving my beat-up pickup down a deserted country road, heading home after a long day at work. The rain was coming down hard, making it difficult to see a few feet in front of me. I turned the radio on to keep myself company, but the only thing that came through was static. Suddenly, I saw something in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I got closer, I realized it was a big, old rusty truck with a flatbed trailer attached. It looked like it hadn't been driven in years. I slowed down, trying to get a better look, but as I got closer, the truck started moving. It was coming straight towards me, with its headlights pretty much blinding me. I slammed on the brakes and swerved to the side of the road, but the truck didn't slow down, it just kept coming. I turned around and floored it, trying to put as much distance between me and the truck as possible, but it was no use. The truck was faster, and it was gaining on me. My heart was pounding in my chest as I swerved around corners, trying to shake the truck, but it was always there, right behind me. I could see the driver now, a shadowy figure behind the wheel, but I couldn't make out any details. Finally, I saw a dirt road up ahead and turned onto it, hoping that it would lead me to safety, but the truck followed. It was driving recklessly through the mud, and I could feel my truck shaking as I hit potholes and bounced over the rough terrain. The dirt road led to a dead end, and I slammed my brakes, sliding to a stop. I got out of the truck, running to a small farmhouse. I banged on the door and an older man opened. I told him everything, and he quickly got a shotgun, and we drove back to the spot. We reached the spot where I turned onto the dirt road, but we could not find the truck. We searched for a little bit, but there was no trace. Anyways, I never saw the truck again, but I could never forget the terror of being chased in the dark countryside with no way to escape. Even today, when I drive through rural areas, I can't help but keep a watchful eye out for an old rusty truck, fearing that it will come after me again. Okay, for starters, this happened in July of this year, and it still freaks me out. I was 23 when this happened. It was a hot afternoon and I was going home from my boyfriend's house, who lives about a 15 to 20 minute walk from my home. Since it was scorching heat, I was wearing my bike shorts and an oversized tee with sneakers. As I'm getting about 10 minutes away from my home, I put my headphones on and decided not to rush, as I didn't want to get there just yet because I was enjoying the fresh air. As I'm going across the street, a man in a truck, who was also across the street, began catcalling me. I ignored him and waited for the light to change. As I waited, he began getting increasingly more aggressive and overall just wouldn't shut up. The light changes and I make my way across the street. He then proceeds to honk his horn as I'm walking by and says, "Hey, I'm talking to you. Why don't you come with me for the night? I'll treat you real good." I immediately told him to leave me alone and continued on my way, but as I'm walking, he follows me with his truck and keeps trying to get me to go with him. I call my boyfriend and tell him the situation, and he FaceTimes me to see the car and the person who was following me. He then tells me to go into the store and stay there. I do as he said, and not even 2 minutes later after I walk in, the man walks in. He was looking for me. He spots me, and I immediately go to the person behind the counter and tell her the situation. She offers to let me go in the back to call the police. I told her yes and waited. He walks up to the front of the store and asks the lady if she's seen anyone with my description. She immediately says no, and if he's not going to buy anything to please leave, as she had other customers. He begins huffing and puffing, saying that he knows that he saw me, and once again she says to leave and that if he doesn't, she will call the police. That got him, and he left. About 5 minutes later, my boyfriend arrives and tells me he's going to take me home as he feels it's safer. I didn't argue and we leave the store. As we walk out, the man is right there. He looked at us and said, "Oh, so you're going to tease me with a boyfriend?" Typical. My boyfriend immediately goes into protective mode and gets in the man's face and tells him, "If I ever see you again, if you ever breathe in our direction again, you'll regret it." He then proceeds to punch the man in the groin and walks me back to my house. Sometimes I really hate being a woman.